Welcome to session 4, where we want to look at how you analyze qualitative data. And so our goal in this session is pretty simple. It's that you can analyze qualitative data by following the 3 steps of the constant comparative method. And so we're going to be utilizing the constant comparative method in the DMIN program at TKU to analyze qualitative data. And so what is the constant comparative method? Well, that's exactly what we're going to be talking about here today. And so the 3 steps of the constant comparative method are to transcribe, to code, and to interpret. So let's take each one of these in order. The first is to transcribe. So when we are talking about transcribing, what we are saying is that we want to take the spoken word and convert it into writing. So most of you will be doing interviews in your qualitative data. And so when you do an interview, you want to record the interview. You want to audio record the interview. And then when the interview is completed, you want to transcribe it word for word, including all of the ums and the ahs and the pauses. You want to be able to take some notes in the middle of that interview as well, that indicates when a person is looking off into space, or where it seems like they're reflecting and thinking, where it seems like they can't quite find the words, all of their nonverbals. You really want to try to record that. And then you convert all of this spoken word into writing. So however many interviews you have, you're going to need to convert that into writing so that you can analyze it. Also within transcription, you need to take your observation notes and make sure that they're complete. So if you participate or engage in observation as a data collection method, then you need to ensure that your notes about the observation are complete and full, and then you need to bring all of that information into your data analysis as well. And then third, in the transcription process, is you need to ensure that your archival documents are accessible. That means that if you have collected a document from here or from there, and you want to include that document in the analysis process, then you need to make sure that that document is all part of the record, that it is as much a part of the record as the transcription of the interview is, that it is as much a part of the record as an observation is. So if there is something from a website that you feel like is important, then you need to copy and paste that information, preferably everything that's there within that website page, copy and paste that and ensure that it is accessible to you so that you can begin to code all of this data. And so once you have the transcription done of your interviews, of your observations, and you have the archival documents available, then you're ready for step 2. Step 2 is to code. Now, what is code? By coding, this is what I mean, that you take a look at what has been written and you try to identify what is important from all this writing. And you will give it a name. You'll put a label on it. And I'm going to give you an example here in just a moment so that you can see. There's actually 4 layers to coding that you will need to do in the qualitative data analysis process. And the first layer is called open coding. Now, when you do open coding, this is really just it's designed to give you a sense of what is there. So let's say you have transcribed your very first interview, and it turns out that it was a 60-minute interview. You asked a bunch of questions. They answered a bunch of questions. After You transcribed it. It's 15 pages. 60-minute interview is 15 pages long. So what you need to do is you need to familiarize yourself with what is there in the transcription. Now, some of you are going to want to hire out the transcription because transcribing takes a lot of time to do. Moving from an audio interview into a written piece, some of you are going to say that's too much work. When I did my dissertation, I did not hire it out. I did it myself. And it proved to be incredibly, incredibly beneficial for me because as I was transcribing it, I was obviously listening to the audio and remembering what was happening in the environment, what I was thinking and what I was feeling. And so I was able to jot that down in the notes as well. It might have been something that escaped me or something that got away from me. So let me give you an example of this. I was down in Galveston interviewing one of the vice presidents of Texas A&M University at the Galveston campus. And so I had taken my son down to Galveston. We were kind of making a little trip out of it as well. So I was going to interview a bunch of people, and then we were going to spend some time on the beach and riding bikes and stuff like that. And so I think he was around 13 or 14 at the time. I don't remember exactly the timing of it. And so I left him in the hotel while I went to go conduct the interview. Well, the hotel was probably a half hour or so away from the campus, and the road to get to the campus kind of had you. It was a winding road, and it had you swinging back and forth. And so at one point, I was on the road looking back towards where the hotel was, about 30 minutes off, but I knew the hotel was off in that area. And as I looked out there, I could see that the sky, I could see that there was rain out in the area, and I was just thinking, oh, that looks pretty. And then I noticed this little sliver of smoke that was going up into the air. And I thought, wow, I don't remember seeing a smokestack over there. I don't remember seeing anything on fire when I left. Man, that's amazing. I wonder what's going on there. I just kind of had in the back of my mind, I'll need to look at that when I get done. And so I went on and went into the interview, and the interview ended up starting a few minutes late, and I could tell that they were really kind of it was chaos there for a little bit as they were doing something and kind of delaying the interview. And finally, the vice president got me into his office, and we sat down to have a conversation. And we're getting into the initial greeting, the conversation. I've already hit record. We're into the initial greetings, and we're talking through things. And finally, we've already started to get into a little bit of the content. And as we're flowing along, he pauses and said, I didn't say this to you, but I just wanted to apologize for starting late. He said, we've had our eye on a tornado that's nearby. And I went, oh wow, a tornado nearby. Wow, that's amazing. I hope it wasn't in this area over here, because that's where my hotel was. And he paused for a second and he looked at me and he said, well, that's exactly where the tornado was. And at that moment, it hit me that the little sliver of smoke that I had seen, it wasn't smoke, it was the tornado. And that realization that the tornado was in the very vicinity of where my son was in that moment, that I had seen a tornado, it took me off my game for a moment. And I could feel the blood rushing out of my face. And I was thinking, is my son okay? Is he buried beneath rubble in the hotel? What do I do here? Do I press forward with this interview? Do I shut it off? And and I was glad I had the audio recording, because I could kind of hear what I did in that moment. And it was important for me because there was important data that was being collected, and I was the data collector. And having that audio piece in place and transcribing it myself enabled me to record my emotions as the data collector upon discovering that a tornado was basically on top of my son, and I had seen it and didn't realize it was a tornado. Thought it was just this whiff of smoke up in the air. And so I was able to weave my emotions of that moment into the data collection process, simply because I became the transcriber of the data. And so when you transcribe your data, you will recall your emotions of that interview, and you'll even be able to remember what this person was going to say before they actually say it, because your mind is able to recall it. And that becomes really, really important for getting a sense of what that interview was about. And that's what the open coding process is. It really doesn't have a formula to it. It's where you sit down and you read the entirety of your transcript. You go back through it and you pay attention to the movements of the interview. Where does it seem that things are flowing well? Where does it seem like the maybe interviewee got a little bit offended by one of your questions? Where does it seem like the interviewee doesn't want to answer one of your questions? Where does it seem like the interviewee really becomes engaged? Thinking through your own emotions. I'm feeling bored at what this person is saying, so it's possible I'm not paying close attention. It feels like this person is rambling, like they don't really know what they want to say. They're just saying stuff. Or even they're not giving me their heart right here. They are giving me the company line, or they're giving me their learned response, not their learned response, like their professor response. If you're interviewing a professor, sometimes you'll get that where they give you the answer they think you want to hear rather than what it is you really are trying to get at. And so as an interviewer, you kind of have to press through that and push against that so you can get to the depth of the material that's actually there. And so sometimes you'll find yourself saying, this interview is going nowhere. Like I've tried several times to press through, and this person just has this wall up. They're not interested. And I can tell by my own voice, and I recall feeling this, that I don't want to do this anymore. You're not giving me any data. I can feel myself getting bored. You're just telling me what you think I want to hear. It's not going anywhere. And I can tell in my own voice that I'm wanting to shut it down. So what does that mean about me as the data collector and the data that I am trying to bring into this interview? That's all part of this open coding process, is just getting a really strong sense of what is happening in your interview. And so you might make a few notes. You might break your interview down into sections and say, okay, this part right here, I'm going to code this as the introduction. This part over here, I'm going to code it as the engaged part. And actually, there's 3 engaged parts in this interview. But then we've got a part right here where the interviewee is really not paying attention and just kind of, it feels like they're not engaged at all, and they're uninterested in the question. And so I might code that the interviewee was bored. And then I might have another section that I say the interviewer, me, I was bored right here. It's just getting a sense of what's happening in your interview. And so the first round of the coding process is just getting this sense. And you want to do that for all of your interviews. That's layer 1 of the coding process, open coding, just getting a sense of what's there and what's happening. Structural coding is the second piece, and it's really where you begin to uncover the details, the data of what's happening in your in your data. It is this process where you read the first sentence of the interview. You try to identify the places in that first sentence that you think are important. You give that a label, you give that a code, and then you move on to the second sentence or the second piece, and you try to decide what is important right there and compare it against your first code. Try to make a decision. Okay, was this like the first code, or is something different being said here? And if it's the same, then you code it with that same label that you had before. If you feel like it's a different topic or different issue, then you label it with another code. So what might this look like in real life? So let's just say this is my very first interview, and these are the very first words that have been spoken in the interview. And so I've transcribed it, and this is what it says. I've been looking, now this is the interviewee saying this to me, the interviewer. So this is my subject saying this to me. My subject said, I've been looking forward to this conversation because I'm very interested in how people pursue their identity in their daily lives. You know, fidgets in chair, looks away as if searching for an answer written on the wall. Notice that these are my notes. So I'm noticing the nonverbals of the interview subject. And I recorded the and the the pause. I went ahead and put that in there because that may be important. And just notated, what is this person doing in their nonverbals? So you know, they fidget in their chair, they look away as if searching for an answer written on the wall. Most people don't even recognize that they're basing very menial decisions on their identity. They just do stuff. Looks me square in the eye. We've got to help people realize how important this is. So this is the first 30 to 45 seconds of the interview. And let me just walk you through how I might go through this structural coding process. So the very first thing I'm going to do is look at sentence 1. I've been looking forward to this conversation because I'm very interested in how people pursue their identity in their daily lives. And so what stands out to me is the first part of this sentence. I've been looking forward to this conversation. All right, so this person's been looking forward to the conversation. We're talking about identity here. This is the problem I'm trying to solve. I'm interviewing them about identity, and they are looking forward to the conversation. So this might be important to me, and so I'm going to give it a label, and I can give it any label I want. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to label it eager. This person seems eager to talk to me. There may be other eager people in the future that the transcripts show they're eager to talk with me. And so I'm going to go ahead and create a new code. Code 1 is this, eager. And so I have my first code. It comes from the first handful of words of my very first interview. I've got my first code. I'm well on the way to the data analysis process. So then I'm going to look at the second part because I'm very interested in how people pursue their identity in their daily lives. Well, that stands out to me too. And what I want to do is I want to compare it to the first code. Does this seem like they're still talking about eager? Or does it seem like they're talking about something different? It feels to me like they're talking about something different. Now, the first part of the sentence, they were eager to talk to me, but the real reason they were eager to talk to me is the second part of the sentence. And so that second part can actually stand on its own. And to me, it feels like it's its own code. It is its own code. And so I want to give it a label. And so I'll create my second code. My first code was eager, but I'm going to go ahead and create a second code because it feels different than the first code. So now I'm using the constant comparative method. I'm constantly comparing my words that I'm evaluating to the previous words I've already coded. That's what the constant comparative method is. You are constantly comparing new words to the words that you've already coded to determine, am I looking at something new or does it fit in a code I've already developed? Well, to me, this feels like something different than eager, and I'm going to give it a new code. I'm going to call it identity pursuit. So now I have two codes. Fantastic. So notice I have two codes out of the first sentence. But as a good researcher, I'm not done because there is something else that seems to stand out to me in sentence 1, and it's these two words right here, daily lives. That feels important to me. So the first part of the sentence, they were talking about how eager they were to talk to me. Then they were talking about how people pursue identity, but rather than just stopping it at I'm very interested in how people pursue their identity, they added this little sentence at the end, daily lives, and that feels important to me. It feels like it's different than eager, and it feels like it's different than identity pursuit. It feels like they're talking about that this identity, people's identity, ends up showing up in these very small places in their lives, their daily lives, like brushing teeth and minutia. And so I'm going to call this identity minutia. This kind of feels important. Now, at the end of everything, I may only have one code that is identity minutia, or under identity minutia, I only have this one place where I've identified that identity minutia is a label or a code. And so if I only have one place, then I probably have misidentified, and it's not really a code, and I'll bump it out at that point. But for right now, I'm going to leave it in. So in the first sentence, I have three codes that I have been able to uncover. And again, I am well on my way along the data analysis process. It's coming together because I am looking at word for word what is going on and comparing each word or each set of phrases against the previous labels that I have already identified. And so let's keep moving forward. So I've got this next piece. Fidgets in chair, looks away as if searching for an answer written on the wall. I'm going to go ahead and code this because it feels like this person needed to gather their words together, but it felt like they wanted to make sure it was right. And so they were searching for the right words. So to them, this felt like an important moment. And so I'm just going to say purposeful reflection. They had a purposeful reflection here. And I want to see where else purposeful reflection occurs in my interviews. And if purposeful reflection seems to come up quite a bit on this topic of identity, I might want to figure out what is going on there. And so we keep going on. Most people don't even recognize that they're basing their menial decisions on their identity. Now remember, constant comparative method means you take the next phrase and you compare it against the codes that you already have. And because we're talking about menial decisions, we're talking about identity based on menial decisions, it kind of feels like a code I already have, identity minutia. And so I'm going to label this piece as identity minutia. Now, I know what you may be thinking. How, like physically, how do you label it? Like, what do you do to label that? Do you like write in the margin of your your transcript. I mean, how does that happen? And so I'll show you a program that I encourage you to use if you're going to utilize qualitative data analysis. I'll show you how you can. I won't show you, but I'll direct you where you can go to get a program to do this. So now I've got 2 data points under this code of identity minutia. And then we're continuing to move on. I am going to go ahead and pay attention to this. Looks me square in the eye. We've got to help people realize how important this is. So again, this feels important to me. And so I'm going to go ahead and code this. They got focused. They became action oriented. And so I'm going to call this focused action. Now, notice, I came up with the labels. There wasn't a code book somewhere, a label book somewhere that I was taking and applying it. I became the analysis piece. And so from my experience with the literature review, knowing what is important in the literature, with my experience in the biblical theological review, I know what's important. And so I am using my own experiences to define what the codes are. It's completely up to me to identify what the important pieces are. So it also is important to recognize that I don't have to code every word. So in this example that we just went through, you'll notice that the sentence, "they just do stuff," I didn't code that. Now, I could if I wanted to, but for me, it didn't feel like it was important. And so I ended up not coding it. So let me just say, at the end of the structural coding process, when you've done all of your interviews, I'll give you an example from my own dissertation. I ended up with 15 interviews, each one of them about 20 pages in length, transcribed. They were over 200,000 words. So I analyzed over 200,000 words. And from those 200,000 words, I identified 5,000 codes. Yeah. So you're going to have a lot of codes. And you're going to have to do something with those codes. You're going to have to make sense of those codes, which is what the next step is about. The next step is called axial coding. Axial coding is where you take all of the initial codes. So in my case, I had 5,000 of them. And now I need to begin to pull these codes together. And so one of the first things that I do in axial coding is I want to create an axis between the codes. Which of these codes connect? It doesn't mean which of these codes am I going to combine. It means which of these codes are similar. Now, sometimes it may be that I've reproduced codes, but just with a different name. I mean, with 5,000 codes, you're likely to reproduce a code and give it a different name, and you didn't quite realize that. But after a while, you'll become so familiar with your codes, you'll know your coding structure, and you'll know what those 5,000 codes are. It'll make sense to you because you will be into your data. Well, so now you need to begin to make sense of what these codes are. And so I begin with the very first code, and it might have 15 data points in it. From all of the interviews that I've done, I have taken 15 data points and put it under this first code. So then I want to go to each one of those codes and I want to give it a definition. What is this code actually saying? So under identity minutia, I might just write out identity minutia means that the interviewee, and I might not even use interviewee, but the identity minutia means that identity is found in the small day-to-day activities of a person's life. That's what identity minutia is. And so I want to then begin to look at each of my codes, and I want to begin to bring my codes together into these categories. And so I might have 30 codes that all seem to fit in this category over here, and another 45 codes that seem to fit into this category over here, and another 10 codes that seem to fit into this category over here. So then I move from 5,000 individual codes to now I might come away with 300 different categories. And so from that, I begin to move into, that was called axial coding. Then I want to begin to move into what's called theoretical coding. Theoretical coding is where I begin to find themes. So now I take these 300 categories and I try to identify the themes that are happening in there and begin to give definitions from that and take my categories, turn them into themes, from that create sub-themes and subcategories so that I then have a structure about my data. I've got a theme that the theme of identity is found in day-to-day activity. So that might be the primary theme. And under that primary theme, I might have a sub-theme or a subcategory of daily activity, daily prayer, daily Bible reading. There's all kinds of things that the data might reveal to me that are subcategories beneath this primary theme of the daily activity. And so where am I getting these themes from? Well, at this point, I want to lean back into what is the problem I'm trying to solve, what is the purpose of my study, and what are the research questions that I'm trying to answer. All of these help me form the themes, which then has a natural next step or natural lead into our third step. So our first step is to transcribe. Our second step is to code. Our third step is to interpret. I begin to make sense. This is what my theme means. And so the process for this looks like this. I take my data and turn those data into codes. I take my codes and I turn my codes into groups. What's alike here? I take my groups and I put my groups into categories. And from my categories, I can then begin to identify the themes and the sub-themes of the data before me. Okay? So it's a living process, all right? And doesn't have so much a formula that you follow as it does an experience that you undertake. And it's at this point, a lot of people say, you know what, I'm going to do a quantitative study. It just seems like it's more straightforward. I do a little bit of math, and then I've got my quantitative study. And you would be right to say, well, this is a little bit more than I anticipated. This seems a bit overwhelming. Yes, you're right. For my study, the data analysis process took me 6 months. 6 months of every day, 6 days a week at least, diving into my data and trying to make sense of what is happening with that data. So it's a very intense process. Now, my work was a PhD work. Yours is a Doctor of Ministry work, so I wouldn't anticipate that you have the level of depth that my university wanted me to put into it, but you still need to have some depth to it. And you still need to be able to work with your professor, your advisor, project advisor, and your methods advisor to have them guide you in this process of coding and figuring out what is happening with your data. So yes, it is an intensive process, but it is quite enjoyable. And along the way, you will learn massive amounts of material about your subject, about your topic. You'll begin to see solutions to the problem beginning to materialize. It'll begin to form in your head as you're seeing these codes come into place. And for me, it was almost like watching one of my children grow up. When they're infants and all they do is really lay there in the bed and cry and make a mess. And after you do that for a few months, you think, well, is this all there is? I thought we were going to play catch at some point. Well, of course you are. They've got to grow up, and you've got to nurture them. You've got to feed them and help them grow up. And that's what happens with your study. It grows up, and there's an immense amount of joy watching your study mature, watching your data begin to take shape. And at the end of it, you literally are your expert. You are the expert on your data. No one else has the level of information that you have. So the next question is obviously, okay, how do I do this? Like, how do I even begin to go about it? Well, there's a software piece that I would really encourage you to look at. It's called MaxQDA. It stands for Maximum Qualitative Data Analysis. And you can go to this website right here, www.maxqda.com. For students, the base software piece, I think, is $47. I think that's right. It's around $50 for a 6-month subscription to it. If you want longer, they have for a little bit more money. You can have it, I think, for up to 2 years. You can have the subscription for up to 2 years. So you might want longer than six months, so you can just kind of wallow in your data a little bit to figure out with a little more depth what is happening. So go to MaxQDA and take a look at that. The software piece looks like this right here. Let me just give you a couple of thoughts on what's happening. So if you look on the far left-hand side of the screen where it says your data, so that is the place where all of your transcripts would live. So you've got a document of transcript number 1. You also there have a document from transcript number 2, transcript number 3, observation number 1, observation number 2. So all of that would be listed right there. So then when you click on one, here they've got just above your data, they've got notes, session number 5 through 8 methods highlighted. You'll look over to the middle section where it says document browser. That's where your actual document, the interview, your transcript of the interview would show up right there. And so what you would do is you would highlight in that document the pieces that seem important to you, just like we talked about earlier under structural coding. And then you would give it a code which sits on the left-hand side where it says your codes. You would create a new code right there. And you can see that there are codes and there are subcodes and there are subcodes of subcodes. And so it looks like this problem is this person is well into the structural the structural coding process, and probably even in the axial coding process a little bit because of the subcodes that they have going on there. For example, it says interview guide topics, and then underneath that, health, recreation, home life, relationships, career. Kind of seems to me like they're already into the axial coding process. And so then when you click on, let's say, under your codes there, relationships, on the far right-hand side, it will have listed all of the codes from all of your documents. So you will be able to see from all of your documents where what is happening with this particular code that's going on right there. So this is the software piece that I used for my study. It was amazing and incredibly helpful. I actually transcribed all of my interviews right here in this software piece, and so it is the place that I would really encourage you to go to. All right, so this is the primer on qualitative data analysis. There are, at the PhD level, there are semester-long courses on this topic, and multiple semesters, in fact, on how you do qualitative data analysis. So again, we're not trying to turn you into this qualitative data analysis king or queen. We're just simply trying to give you the tools you need to effectively and empirically analyze your data. And so as you write your final report for this class, you can talk about how you're going to use open coding and structural coding and axial coding and theoretical coding in order to fully analyze your data. Remember, that's the point of this final assignment. You don't have to go in depth about each of these things. It's only a 3-page assignment. And so if you really go into depth, the kind of depth that even that I've gone into in this particular video, which is actually quite shallow, then you will run over 3 pages very, very quickly. So you don't need to do that. All you need to do is be able to demonstrate. I'm going to do the constant comparative method. I'm going to go through 4 levels of coding. I'm going to do open coding, which means this. I'm going to do a structural coding, which means this. Then I'm going to do an axial coding, which means this. And then I'm going to do a theoretical layer of coding, which means this. And in doing that, you will demonstrate that you understand what the data analysis process is. All right, thanks for your time, and we will see you later.